So today we are going to do a demo for a look that is sort of like a mesh between the world of like dance and then the world of Cirque du Soleil. So for this lesson that we just did, we covered makeup for ballet, makeup for ballroom dance, and then also makeup for Cirque du Soleil. So I know it was like kind of all over the place, but I do feel that those three worlds are all kind of related in that they kind of step away from what we typically see in a lot of like traditional theatrical makeup. So you see a lot more like extreme colors and extreme shapes. The eyes, there's usually a lot more definition placed on the eyes in ballet and ballroom than we might see in just like a regular eye makeup for theater. So I kind of wanted to do a demo that was going to give you a little bit of each one. So that way, if there's something you needed to review, because I know some of this we did go through in class already, but just in case we need to brush up on it or somebody new is watching, whatever the case may be, I just wanted to be able to go through a few key things and just make sure that we have all the techniques that we need in case we want to do any of these looks or all three of these looks. So the very first thing that I did after I like primed my face, because I am wearing such heavy makeup, I wanted to put some primer down just so that it's easier to remove it all later. I do like to have a barrier between my skin and the makeup when I'm using like thicker creams, just so that way, one, so I don't worry about my skin staining, and two, I just feel like it's a little bit better for my skin in general if I have a little bit of protection from all the makeup, because I do have oilier skin, so I do think that it can kind of help you in the long run just get things to stay on a little bit better, to go like apply more evenly, and then also just to protect your skin a little bit more. So once I had that on, I already went through, I did all my foundation and my corrective on this side. I didn't do any of my contouring and my highlighting because we're going to do that with different colors, as you can see. So the reason that I wanted to do the colorful contour in both cream and powder is just to kind of show you one of the techniques that I learned when I interned at Cirque du Soleil. So I don't know that every show does this, but the show that I interned on was Mystère, and the makeups that I got to see people doing, I noticed that they would put down their cream makeups first, and they would set everything with a neutral powder, and then they would go back in with the corresponding colors in a dry press powder, so like an eyeshadow or a blush, and go back over everything, so that way they have that like first layer on that really like carves everything out, and it kind of puts down a primer. Because if you think about like with our eyeshadows, we usually have some sort of like a base color down, and then we apply other things over that. So this is sort of like the same idea, but on a larger scale, right? So if I already have this cream down, and then I have that set, that's not really going to go anywhere. That's going to stay there. The only issue is that usually once you powder something, you kind of lose some of the vibrancy of it. So going back in with those pressed powders brings that vibrancy back. So that is the very first thing we're going to do. So I usually do all of my like contouring and shading first, just because it's easier for me to see shadows than it is to see highlights. But if you feel like you can see your highlights more easily, then go ahead. Absolutely, you can do your highlights first. I think it's really just like a matter of personal preference. So I obviously used a couple different purples. So I'm going to start with my first one. So this is just a cream makeup. And because I did not set my face yet on this side, it's going to blend in with everything without it getting kind of like patchy or dry, which would happen if you set your creams and then tried to blend more on top of them. So first I'm just going to go in and kind of lay the color down. So these creams are very, very pigmented, so a little bit goes a long way, and I think that's one thing I see a lot of people use like way too much makeup sometimes. So I think we just have to remember that there's probably more that's going to come out of it than we think. So I always start with a little bit less, and then if I have to go in and add more, then I'll add it. But I think it's always better to kind of play it like on the safe side, just so that you don't end up with too much product on your face. Okay, and then to blend it, I always do little circles. I always feel like that's like one of the easiest ways to explain blending. So you don't want to like pull the color, because if I pull it, that's just kind of like picking the color back up off my face. But if I just kind of like pat it in, that's going to help it blend into the foundation that I already have on, and then also get rid of any hard lines. So if I have anything like right there that I feel like that comes up too high, I'm going to add highlight with it, so I'll be able to blend it back down to where it needs to be. And then, even though I'm trying to get really good definition here, I don't pull it down super, super low. I see a lot of people do that. I always think it's better if you kind of stop like halfway to where your cheekbone is, and then you kind of blend it into the shape that you want. So that way I feel like you get a more natural look without these like crazy harsh lines. Because like obviously I still have really good definition, but I don't have like a straight line drawn on my face. And I think that's one habit that a lot of people in theater kind of like get into the mindset of doing, because I think that we think because it has to be seen from far away that we have to have these like crazy intense lines and things, but really like you can have just like shadows and shapes and it'll still show up well without it being like very severe lines. And then always make sure when you're doing your jaw, I always say in my classes, it's to make sure that you're not a floating head. So a lot of times, like if this was something that was going to be for Cirque du Soleil, they have like headpieces or costumes that would probably be covering this part of them, and their makeup just kind of like bleeds into that essentially. But if you're sending somebody out on stage and like this much of their neck is being seen, at least like I try to bring it down to here, but you would maybe even want to like shade somebody's entire neck too. But for the purposes of this, we're not gonna worry too much. And then don't forget about ears too. If somebody's ears are going to be seen, you would need to paint up the ears as well. And then again, so when it's on the neck, sometimes like I'll pull that down, but usually on most places on the face, I am doing like the little circles to kind of blend it out. Okay, and so I could just stop here, call it with one color. I always like to add multiple colors. I think that's something that you do see in a lot of like performance makeup, especially in Cirque du Soleil, and I think even in like a lot of like dance makeups, is that they use a lot of different colors, just because a lot of times like their costumes are very vibrant, their characters are really just like vibrant in general, so I think it's kind of fun to play with different shades, and you can get a lot of like cool dimension that way. So I'm going to take a like darker like burgundy color. So this color is like one of my absolute favorite colors in makeup. This one in particular is called Lake, from Krylon. If you've ever taken any kind of class with me before, or if this is one of my students watching this, everybody knows how much I talk about this color. I'm obsessed with it. If I could pretty much have like one color to do makeup with for the rest of my life, it would probably be this one, just because I can use it for special effects makeup, I can use it for beauty. It pretty much works for like everything. So I'm just kind of going over the color that I already laid down and blending this over it. And then again, so we're going to come in with the highlight, and that's going to kind of help like blend everything together too. So it seems like it's like a lot of this color right now, but everything is going to blend into this really nice gradient once we get everything on. But adding this color in, you get a lot more dimension than if I would have just left that one shade of purple. And again, I'm gonna add it on my jaw. And you can kind of like, so if there's places like usually it's like people's cheekbones that they want to define more, you can add a little bit more of it there and kind of like into the hairline too. And so what I also like to do is I go back with the original color, and I'm just using just like a regular makeup sponge to do this. I really like them because they're disposable, and I don't really like cleaning really like thick cream makeup out of my like really nice foundation brushes and stuff. So a lot of times if I'm using like more extreme colors, I will usually just go for something like this. I think it works perfectly fine. I think most people have access to it, like especially in theater. I think it's one of the things that we're given. Some people like to use beauty blenders. That's perfectly fine too. I just always tell people with that, if you know you're not going to clean it, don't buy it, just because it is something that you do have to clean and you do have to worry about cleaning. And again, we're just working on getting everything into like a nice shape. And then you don't want to forget, when you are using like extreme colors like this, like you can see it, I did a little bit on one side of my nose already. If you do like all this really extreme like contouring and color all over your face, but you forget to do like your nose and other places that are normally shaded, it can look a little bit weird. So I'll usually go back in and do just a little bit. And again, like these are all very intense colors, but you'll see once they are powdered down, you do lose a lot of the vibrancy. And then I did go in and I used a brush for this, just whenever I work in like smaller areas, I feel like I tend to use brushes more. So if it's somewhere larger, I'll use a sponge, but if it is a smaller area, I think it's just a little bit easier to at least like apply it with a brush. Like sometimes I'll still go in with a sponge and blend it, but I do think that using a brush to apply makes it a lot easier. And so you can just kind of like blend that down. This part gets a little weird until you get the highlight, but at least you won't lose your nose with everything, because there's going to be a lot of stuff going on, and you just want to make sure that you don't forget to shade anywhere that you would in like your normal beauty makeups. And even like I usually put like a little bit right there. Make sure your chin's good, like around your lips. Just make sure you kind of got everything. Okay, and then once you're at this point, it's kind of when I would want to start adding my highlight back in. So for my highlight, I am going to go in and add it in with a brush, just because I feel like it's a little bit easier to add in something with a brush when it's a little bit of like a smaller area. Just because I feel like if I used a sponge to do that, I would probably like cake way too much of this with highlight. And then remember, anywhere we have a shadow, we're going to want highlight. So I'm using just pure white for this. This is pretty much the color I have to use for like regular beauty makeup for a highlight, because I am very, very pale. But you certainly don't have to use white. It's just for my skin tone, this is what kind of makes sense. And then I'm going to add a little bit down the center of my nose. Be careful with your nose. If you do too much on the end of it, that's going to just kind of make everything look a little bit bigger. So that's what you're trying to do for your character. Then go ahead and do that, but just be careful and know that like wherever you put this is definitely going to draw a lot of attention. Again, so I'm kind of just like filling everything back in with the white. And then I can blend some of it out with this brush, but I will, now that I have it like more precisely applied where I want it to be, I can go back in with the sponge and blend it into like the more general areas. But again, anything that's like a more precise like application, I do tend to use a brush. But sometimes it's just like whatever I have on hand, because I think we all know working in theater that you don't always have all of your ideal products for everything that you are doing. So sometimes you kind of just have to like make things work. So I think it's good to kind of train yourself to use sponges and brushes. And I know I have like some actors and actresses that use like their fingers to put things on. I don't do that if I'm working on somebody else, but you may find one day if you are working as like a designer or a makeup artist that you have actors and actresses who do that. If it's somebody working on themselves, I usually just kind of let them do whatever, because I think people are going to do what they want anyway. But again, if you are working on other people, you should always be using some kind of a brush, unless it's like a situation where there's like some things with special effects makeup where you just can't. But something like this where it's more like beauty focused, you would definitely want to be using some kind of a brush to apply it, or some kind of applicator. And then I'm not going to worry too much about my neck, just because I'm not doing like a full makeup on my neck, but if I was, I would go through and I would highlight everything there too. And then now you kind of just go between all the colors and kind of like blur it all together. And again, it's like the little circles that will help you do that when you are blending. And then once I kind of finished getting this all blended and where I want it to be, I'm going to set everything with just a totally translucent powder. So I'm going to use one that is actually like a waterproof setting powder that Krylon makes. It's a Dermacolor setting powder. And it is a powder that just like will not mix with water at all. So just because something is waterproof doesn't necessarily mean that it's sweatproof. But there are actually, like, there's a show that Cirque du Soleil does where they are actually underwater. And supposedly they use this powder. I don't work on that show, so I don't know for sure, but that is what I have been told working at Krylon. That is what they told us. But it's a really nice powder. I think it's a great like beauty setting powder. But again, it just kind of helps you remember that anytime you're doing makeup for like dance or circus, whatever it is, you need stuff that's going to be durable. So that's too why I like to use a lot of the creams, just because I feel like cream makeup, when it's set really, really well, it's so durable. And I don't really worry about people sweating it off the same way I would if something was like water activated. I think it's rare that someone sweats it off, but there is always a chance that they could. So anything that makes your makeup more durable is definitely what you would want to do as far as any kind of makeup for like dance or like circus is concerned. So I'm just going to go through and finish blending all this. Then I'm going to set it with translucent powder, and then we're going to come back and we are going to touch it all up with pressed powders.